It was 1978, late summer, Western Pacific, east of the Mariana Trench. I remember the date because it was my daughter's birthday week, and I was not home. I was a Navy officer then, assigned to a small, deep work unit that did not exist on paper. We sailed under a testing label. That was never true. Our ship held position over a stretch of ocean that looked empty on every chart. No lanes, no traffic, just depth. 35,000 ft of it. At the depth, the sea is not moving the way sailors understand. It presses. It waits. I was calm that morning. I always was before dive. Calm keeps you alive. The vehicle checks were clean. Power steady. Hold tight. We expected wreckage. A broken classified item that fell where it should not have. We were told to find it, tag it, and bring back what we could. On the first descent, the instruments began to disagree with each other by small amounts. Nothing enough to abort enough to notice. I wrote it down. I always did. When the bottom came into view, it was not a wreck. It was a place and it looked used. Before we start the video, hit the subscribe button to support the channel. I had been in the Navy for over a decade by then. Most of it was quiet work, charts, pressure tables, training men to trust numbers more than instinct. I was not assigned to guns or rate. I worked around depth around machines that went where people could not survive on their own. That kind of work attracts officers who do not talk much. You learn early that the ocean does not care about confidence. Our unit was small, fewer than 20 men rotating depending on the task. Engineers, pilots, 2 medical officers, and a handful of support crew who knew how to keep their mouths shut. We reported to a chain that shifted depending on the mission. Sometimes Pacific Fleet, sometimes a desk in Washington that never returned calls. You stopped asking after a while. The mission briefing for that operation was thin. A classified object had been lost during a joint exercise months earlier. The explanation was clean. Equipment failure. Descent beyond control. Impact somewhere along the trench slope. Our job was recovery or confirmation of destruction. That was normal work for us. Nothing about the briefing suggested danger beyond pressure and distance. The ship we sailed on was an older support vessel modified inside. From the outside, it looked like any other research ship. Inside, it held reinforced bays, winch systems, and a deep submergence vehicle rated beyond what most people believed possible at the time. That vehicle was our well during a dive. A steel sphere controls, worn smooth by gloves and no room to stand. Once sealed, you accepted that the surface might as well be another planet. We reached station after several days at sea. The weather stayed calm, which felt wrong for that part of the Pacific. The water surface was flat, almost dull, no swell worth noting. The crew moved with routine ease, but there was an edge under it. Sailors feel deep water, even if they cannot explain it. The sonar team started mapping long before we deployed, sending sound down into places light never reaches. The first thing that stood out was the seafloor shape. It did not match the older charts. That alone was not alarming. Trenches shift. Slides happened. But this was not a slide. The shelf we were looking at was wide and smooth, like it had been pressed down instead of broken apart. The sonar returns were clean where they should have been messy. Our mapping officer flagged it. The note went into a separate lock. We launched the vehicle just after dawn. The pilot was a man named Harris. Steady hands, quiet voice. I sat to his right, managing systems and recording readings. Another officer sat behind us, watching external feeds. As we descended, light faded the way it always does. Blue to grey to nothing. Time stretched. You stop thinking in minutes and start thinking in depth numbers. At around 20,000 ft, small issues began, not failures, more like arguments. Depth gauges disagreed by a few feet, then corrected. Heading drifted even though there was no current worth mentioning. The external camera showed drifting silt that moved sideways instead of settling. I locked everything. Harris glanced at me once, then kept his eyes forward. By the time we reached the bottom, the vehicle lights cut into a flat expanse. No debris field, no scattered wreckage, just ground that looked worked, lines that run too straight, edges that met at clean angles. It took a few seconds for my mind to accept what my eyes were seeing. Natural terrain does not look like that. Not at that depth. We moved forward slowly, thrusters low. Every foot mattered. The seafloor showed long scrape marks, parallel, evenly spaced. Something heavy had rested there. Something that had been moved on purpose. I remembered feeling a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with air. This was not in the briefing. Then the camera caught something that made the cabin go quiet. A metal object half buried, reflecting our light back in a dull way. Harris eased us closer. It was not the classified item we were sent for. It was a tool, bent, scarred, human-made, and it did not belong 35,000 FT under the Pacific. That was the moment I understood we were late. We stayed on the bottom longer than planned. No one said it out loud, but we all felt it. You do not find human tools at that depth by accident. Harris kept the vehicle steady while I marked the position and took still frames. The light showed more than I wanted. There were shallow cuts in the ground around the tool like someone had worked there in a careful way. Not rushed, not panicked. That meant time. Time is the one thing you do not have that far down. When we returned to the surface, the deck crew acted normal, but the officers did not. Our tapes were taken right away. Logs copied. Questions asked out of order. I answered only what I knew for certain. That habit had kept me safe before. It did not calm anyone. We were told to stand by for another dive the next day. That night, I reviewed the sonar maps again. The smooth shelf extended farther than expected. At its center was a darker turn, almost like a shadow that sound did not want to fill. I had seen odd returns before, but this one stayed the same no matter the angle. It was not empty space. It was something that swallowed the signal. I did not sleep much. The second dive confirmed it. We approached the shadow slowly. Lights cutting a narrow path. As we closed in, the ground changed texture. The smooth surface gave way to something that looked like plates fitted together. Not rock, not metal either. At least not like any hull I knew. The edges met without gaps. There was no debris pile, no rubble. Whatever this was, it had not crashed. We found the object from the briefing a short distance away. It was smaller than expected, split open along one side. The interior was empty. No damage pattern that matched an impact. It looked placed not lost. Harris said nothing, but his hands tightened on the controls. I noted the position and realized the truth was already clear. This object had been brought down here after it was opened somewhere else. Back on the surface, a helicopter arrived without warning. A new officer came aboard with sealed orders and no interest in introductions. He wore no unit badge. His questions were narrow and shut. He did not ask what we felt or thought. He asked what we saw, what we recorded, and what we had not recorded. He knew about the tool before we mentioned it. That told me enough. Our orders changed. Recovery was no longer the priority. Observation was. We were to map, photograph, and mark specific points along the shelf. Certain angles, certain distances. The coordinates matched the dark return I had been studying. No one explained why they did not have to. In the Navy, silence is often the explanation. Over the next 2 days, we made repeated dives. Each time, the place revealed a little more. The structure extended into the seafloor at a shallow angle, like an entrance that had been sealed and reopened more than once. The plates showed wear in patterns that repeated. Something had gone in and out. Not recently, but not ancient either. On the fourth dive, we found a marker line, thin, modern, anchor deep into a seam between plates. It was freight near the end, cut clean. Attached to it was a stamp tag with a serial number format I recognized. It belonged to a Navy supply system from years earlier. I remembered seeing that format during training on the West Coast. The name tied to that tag surfaced in my mind without effort. A man listed as reassigned after a training accident. Nobody recovered. No public report. That was when the weight settled in my gut. This was not a first contact with the place. It was a return. Small things began to change after that. The vehicle drifted even when thrusters held steady. The silt lifted in slow sheets, not dirt bars, moving like it followed a slope we could not see. Condensation formed inside the cabin faster than expected. Droplets sliding down the steel and falling onto panels in a steady rhythm. The lights showed a faint green tone at the edge of their reach. Not bright enough to explain, not dark enough to ignore. I told myself it was stress, fatigue, too many hours watching the same shadows. That explanation worked until the instruments stopped arguing and started agreeing in the wrong direction. Depth, heading, and distance all shifted together, as if something outside the vehicle was setting the rules. On the surface, the new officer approved everything. He watched the feeds with interest, not concern. When Harris suggested we had enough data, the officer shook his head. He said we were close to the reason we were sent. That phrase stayed with me, not the mission. The reason on the final dive of that phase, the shadow opened. The opening did not appear all at once. It showed itself the way deep things often do, by changing what was around it. The silt stopped drifting and began to pull inward, slow and steady, like it was sliding down a shallow bowl. Our lights caught the edges of that movement first, thin lines where the ground no longer lay flat. Harris eased the vehicle forward without being told. At that point, we were all thinking the same thing. The structure had separated along a seam we had passed over before. Plates that once looked fused now showed a narrow gap. Not wide enough for the vehicle, but wide enough to see into the inside swallowed our light. The green glow thickened there, not brighter, just closer, like it had weight. I felt pressure in my ears, even though the cabin system showed no change. My hands rested on the console longer than needed just to feel something solid. We held position and recorded. That was the order. Observe. Do not disturb. The problem was that the place did not seem interested in being only observed. The vehicle began to yaw a few degrees to port. Harris corrected. The correction did not take. He tried again, adding power. The thrusters responded, but the movement stayed slow, like pushing against something thick that did not show itself. I checked the readings. Power drawn normal. No faults, no alarms. The depth held steady, but the sense of motion did not match the numbers. That is hard to explain to someone who has never been down there. You learn to trust the body as much as the gauges. When the two disagree, you pay attention. The opening widened another foot, just enough to reveal a surface inside that did not look like rock. It was smooth, dull, and marked with shallow lines that curved instead of running straight. They did not repeat in a pattern I could follow. The camera struggled to focus, not because of distance, but because the surface did not give clear edges. Harris muttered once, low, more to himself than to us. Behind us, the third officer shifted in his seat. I could hear his breathing through the intercom, steady, but heavier than before. No one spoke. Words felt like they would break something. Then we saw the first object move. It was small, about the size of a helmet. It slid out of the opening and stopped just beyond it, resting on the seafloor without raising silt. Our lights washed over it. It looked wrong in a simple way. Not strange shapes or sharp edges, just wrong material. It did not reflect like metal or absorb like stone. It held the light and bent it slightly, enough to make the edges glow. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to breathe slowly. Training took over. Fear is something you manage, not something you wait to pass. Harris nudged the vehicle back a few feet. The object did not follow. It stayed where it was, angled toward us in a way that suggested an attention without movement. I locked the time. I locked the position. My hand shook just once. I corrected and kept writing. A voice crackled in our headsets. The new officer from the surface. He asked for a status update. His tone was calm, almost pleased. Harris described the opening, the object, the control resistance. There was a pause after that, long enough to feel intentional. The officer told us to hold position and continue recording. He asked specifically about the green light. Whether it was stronger inside the opening, I did not like that he asked before we volunteered the detail. That meant he expected it or he remembered it. The object near the opening shifted slightly, not toward us, sideways. It rotated in place without disturbing the ground. The movement was slow, careful, like something being tested. Harris pulled us back another few feet. This time, the vehicle responded as expected. The thick resistance eased, then returned as we stopped. Condensation began to build faster inside the cabin. Dropouts formed along the upper curve of the hull and slid down in uneven paths. One fell onto the back of my hand. Cold. Much colder than it should have been. The temperature gauge flickered and settled 1 degree lower. Not dangerous, not normal either. The opening pulsed. That is the closest word I have for it. The seam widened and narrowed by inches, like it was breathing. I remembered thinking of pressure doors on submarines, cycling to equalize. The thought did not comfort me. The officer's voice returned. He told us the next phase would require a closer approach. He used the word entry, then corrected himself and said, inspection. The difference mattered. Entry means commitment. Inspection still pretends you can leave without consequence, Harris argued. He kept it professional. He cited vehicle limits. Unknown forces, crew safety. The officer listened and then overrode him. He said the data we were seeing matched prior expectations. That phrase landed hard. Prior expectations meant this had happened before, not theory, experience. We were told to mark the opening and prepare for a follow-up dive within the same watch cycle. No rest, no long review, just surface, swap recording media, and go back down. As we backed away, the object near the opening slid back inside. The seam closed behind it. The shelf returned to stillness. The silt drifted again, slow and sideways, as if nothing had happened. On ascent, none of us spoke. The climb felt longer than usual. My head ached. In a way, pressure does not cause. When we broke surface, the deck lights were already on, even though it was still day. Men I did not recognize waited near the recovery cradle. Their faces were calm, too calm. As the hatch opened, warm air rushed in. It should have felt good. It did not. I knew then that the next dive would not be about observation. It would be about crossing a line we could not uncross. We had less than 3 hours before the next descent. That is not enough time at those depths. The body needs rest, even if the machine does not. No one asked how we felt. Food was brought to us, eaten without taste. I washed my hands and noticed they were still cold, even in warm air. I rubbed them together until feeling returned. The new officer joined us in the control space. He stood behind Harris during the checks, watching every switch. He did not touch anything. He did not need to. He spoke quietly and with certainty, like a man confirming a memory instead of planning an action. He told us the opening would respond to proximity. He said, we should not be alarmed if the vehicle felt resistance again. He called it environmental interaction. I asked him how he knew. He looked at me for a long second, then said experience. That was all. The second descent felt heavier. Same numbers, same rate, but the cabin seemed smaller. The condensation returned faster, beads forming before we reached the bottom. The green glow appeared earlier this time, faint at first, then steady. It hovered just beyond the lights, never crossing into full view. I locked it anyway, knowing the lock might never be seen again. When the seafloor came into view, the opening was already there, wider than before. Waiting is the wrong word, but it felt close. The silt no longer drifted. It hung in place, suspended, as if held by something we could not see. Hara slowed us to the lowest safe speed. Every movement felt watched, not by eyes, but by response. We approached until the vehicle's nose was just short of the seam. The resistance returned thick and even. Thrust was pushed and the vehicle crept forward inch by inch. Inside the opening, the green glow showed depth now, not a flat surface, a corridor. It sloped downward at an angle that did not match the shelf. I checked the inclinometer twice. It disagreed with what my eyes told me. The officer ordered us to extend the camera arm. That was a mistake. The arm moved forward and vanished into the glow. The video feed warped, not with static, but with delay. The image lagged behind the movement by a fraction of a second. Then the feed froze. Power draw spiked and settled. The arm stopped responding. Harris pulled back. The arm did not come with us. It stayed fixed in place like it had been set into something solid. The officer told us to hold position. His voice was steady. Too steady. He said this was expected. A shape moved inside the corridor, larger than the first object we saw. It did not rush. It did not reach out. It adjusted the space around it. The green glow bent, thinning near and near, thickening behind it. I could not tell where it ended. That scared me more than if it had a clear outline. Then something else came into view. Human-made. A suit panel crushed flat, wedged into the corridor wall. I recognized the design immediately. Old Navy deep suit. Retired years before mission. Scratches covered the surface. Not random lines cut deep by a tool or a glove hand. Letters formed the name. The last letter trailed off where the metal bent inward. The name matched the supply tag from the marker line. My stomach tightened. This was not an unknown hazard. This was a known loss that had been buried. Someone had gone inside and never come back. Someone had left a record where only another diver would see it. The officer broke the silence. He ordered us to proceed another few feet. He said the interior pressure field would stabilize. Harris refused. Flat professional. He said the vehicle could not guarantee exit if we crossed that threshold. The officer reminded him of duty, of orders, of consequences. I watched the corridor react to our argument. The green glow pulsed stronger now. The resistance shifted, pushing us sideways instead of back. The suspended silt began to rise, not in clouds, but in sheets, sliding upward along the quarter walls. Condensation inside the cabin fell faster, tapping against panels in uneven rhythm. I realized the place was not passive. It responded to intent, to proximity, to pressure, not just physical, but human. Harris made a choice. He cut power to the forward thrusters and dumped ballast we could afford to lose.